Alright, so, bipartisan SMART. So, one of the great things about bipartisan SMART is essentially you can highlight all the stupid, retarded pedobangers that cause most of the problems in government. So, essentially, the people that'll cause most of the problems will essentially filter their way out. So, this is the nullify the pedobanger method. So, essentially, step one is to graciously have a bipartisan SMART, essentially, and then to explain what that is. And then to build a chess master number off of each theme and function and topic. And then, essentially, to exclude dumb. And see, in this process, somebody like Ted Cruz and Mitt Romney and Donald Trump pretty much will be excluded for talking about things in the fucking retarded, dumb Tea Party way. And then, as you build governance out of a SMART that excludes all of them, then you'll watch as the pedobangers will break psychologically. And then there's also other aspects that if you include man, that will also work towards see, essentially in this method, it's like you find some Pentagon smart man, like a real man, and that then you just include their opinion in place. And it's like, oh, Mitt Romney's a retard. Oh, well, here's this general who may not know much of anything about the topic whatsoever. But whatever he says will be smarter than what you people think. That's kind of the process. And that what that does is these people, as they start to crack psychologically, those people are then pinpointed as the people creating the problems. And then the people that are left over can then start to build a theoretical SMART system that excludes the people that cause the problems. And then if they just want to continue to be a little whiny little bitch about it, then eventually just exclude them and watch how they'll pack themselves in and demand to be a part of it. And then you just replace them with another general or an admiral. And then eventually what it ends up doing is it really highlights how the reason that they'll be so adamant is there's a secondary reason when they get like this, that builds a high probability of them being an insert for some other entity's purpose. And that essentially what they've done behind the scenes, in ways they're slaves that are forced to be influencing as an inserted position person. And that's kind of what this process can basically achieve, is that you start to see the people that just demand to be a part of it or something. Those people have an outside influence that's pushing them in some sort of slave way to be inserted into the position that they're even in that spot in the first place to be a part of. And so what that outside influence is, you never know a lot of the times, but you can concise it down to people that aren't really doing this and aren't really doing this. And that then from this, a smart governance in bipartisan way won't be special interest based. And that is really what will really highlight this. It's because when people do smart in governance is not necessarily about kowtowing to special interests, and that the more people demand their pork shit, the more that they're not being smart in a government block way. And so, one of the things that you can do from a system that finally weeds out people that are like that is that it essentially builds the beginnings of a very concise standard. And then from that, the needed small caveats of pork to make the policy. Instead of having tons of stuff, you essentially see what the bare minimums are to be getting the policy or legislation or whatever it is to be pushed through. And see, once you weed out the people that are there to flood it with fucking whatever, see, smart, educated people know that people know how to build good policy. And that when you start including the intellectuals about the specifics stuff, and when you start to get real economics from Paulson Institute kind of people, when you start to get that stuff, then essentially what you get is what should be done without special interest. And then that's where there's still a reality to the needed kowtowing stuff. But the reality is that you get a standard for what to push back up to once you give in a little bit to special interest. And that a smart governance in a bipartisan way should be pushing this way. And that is essentially where these people will always be getting in the way of what would just be a normal legislation that is supposed to be for everybody in a logical and rational way. And that is where you're gonna be flooded with this Tea Party fucking shit, and that it might end up being that bipartisan, you might end up having like one or two Republicans, people that at least want to figure out what the standard should be, and people that have an understanding of the responsibility, and they'll also potentially know what minimal pork would slide this legislation through. And I mean those are the people that really should be governing the policy making on anything. And in lots of ways, a Pentagon and an executive branch, and you know, the judicial world's a little different. But in ways, this type of stuff is, you know, a Supreme Court. I mean, if your faction hears you saying some dumb pedobang Tea Party kind of shit, that stuff is usually noticed as being illogical. You don't get the opinion, you know. You don't get to write the opinion regardless. I mean, that's kind of what it is. So it's like, you know, this type of stuff at least pushes people to be using logic and rationality in their opinion making, and to be highlighting their illogical stuff, and to be working on having some sort of interpretive opinion that falls inside of a realm of logic. Because one of the things about like a Supreme Court is that you may not agree with like the conservative opinion, but in lots of ways their deliberations, even in the minority or whatever, push the opinion to at least be under some sort of accepted logical interpretation that may not fit into what the specific biases is, but attempts to at least be highlighting the things that would still need to be logical, and in some ways they're able to make logical arguments back and forth. And that when you do this type of stuff, essentially the minority has an ability of, well, I don't know about that. It doesn't really seem. What's your interpretation? Where do you get that from? And then it's like sometimes it highlights like a faulty piece of the opinion, and then that stuff attempts to be corrected for the finalized opinion. And so that is kind of the structure of the Supreme Court, anyways. But in the world of legislation, policy standards is the jump off point, basically. And so to include everybody that adheres to their, it's like when this is kind of the problem. A lot of these people are seen in their little behind the scenes deliberations and legislation. And so they have to maintain their dumb fucking QAnon or Tea Party opinions, because basically they have people that are monitoring them, a lot of them, and that if they don't adhere to what their campaign rhetoric shit is, see, it used to be that, they would say what they needed to the voting constituency, and then behind the scenes they wouldn't necessarily adhere to the stupidest like ideas in the fucking dumb Tea Party. But nowadays they're like, that stuff gets noticed, and that nowadays they have like monitors on that stuff. They kind of, a lot of times their staffers will they'll have a monitor as one of their staffers that attempts to hold them to their stupid Tea Party like theoretics and shit. And so that's essentially where what used to be campaign vote gathering is now turned into where those people are pretty much held to doing what they say in their dumb campaign. And then a lot of times the Democrats, a lot of times they just have smart liberal policy. And so there might be, the whole idea is it's not difficult to explain to Democrats and liberals the need this stuff, right? I mean, those people that would be actively engaged in politics already understand that you have to build a bipartisan legislation. People that know and follow and do politics and stuff in the Democratic Party would be the only ones that would ever raise any type of issue with what they're doing or whatever. And that to explain to liberals and Democrats the need to like be washing something down with some pork a little bit just to make it go through, the actual people that actually follow politics will already know that. And so, and then since years and years and years of them strangling the dragon's wiener from the stupid Tea Party and shutting down all legislation and stuff, most liberals know that method is worthless, and that they've seen what comes of that, of the Tea Parties. Like, they basically are able to shut down most legislation just by being difficult and doing all this preventative like legislation passing kind of stuff. So most Democrats know not to be like a dumb Tea Party, okay? It just means that when you elect your officials, you are electing them to push through legislation that's needed in the country. Tea Party essentially elects officials to be preventing legislation in the country. And so, you know, some legislation the liberals will want to shut down, and that the senators and the Congress people will already know what stuff to be shutting down. They'll already know.